Oh, why don't you say that? Go ahead.
There we go. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the September 12th, 2024 meeting of the Civics Education, Civics Engagement, and Media Literacy Task Force. Good to see those of you in person, as well as those of you joining us online today. So we've got a bit of an agenda to follow this afternoon, and we'll go ahead and get started. Steve?
Yeah, just wanted to ask everybody, if you have something to report, what's going on in civic education, in media literacy in your world? What's happening in whoever you work or whoever you represent, or something you're thinking about? What's going on in your neck of the woods regarding civic education? John, you want to start us off? You got anything?
Hi, Jonathan Weiner. I'm the co-chair of the Civics Education Committee for the Connecticut Bar Association. In our world, a new event is the launch this week of the high school mock trial competition problem for the coming year. And what we can see is we already have skyrocketing interest in the program. It looks like our attendance is going to be up by 15 to 20%, and we're going to have to add at least one new courthouse to the program. So we're very excited about where we are. Looking forward to a great year with the Bar Association. And we think that's a product of bringing our law camp program back in person to New Haven rather than online from the pandemic.
Sally, anything from your end?
I'm Sally Whipple from the Connecticut Democracy Center at Connecticut's Old State House, and I would like to say that we are seeing a big return of school groups finally for field trips after COVID. We've been building up for a couple of years, and now this year we have a lot of kids scheduled to come and learn about the 3 branches of government and other aspects of government through tours at the Old State House. But also, I'm part of the Red, White, and Blue Schools program with Steve, the Department of Education, and the Secretary of the State's office. And we have just, through a grant, been able to hire a consultant who is going to help grow that program. And that's a program where schools who excel in civics or districts who excel in civics can be designated a red, white, and blue school. So we've got a wonderful teacher, Jennifer Vanneau, who is going to be working with us and really enlivening that program, helping people figure out the best resources for their classes and really getting more schools and districts involved in that. So we're really excited about that.
Allison?
Hi, Allison Chandler from the Connecticut Judicial Branch. The now retired Chief Justice, as one of the last things he did before he retired was to send out an email to all elementary school principals, letting them know of the different free resources we have. And those requests are already starting to come in. We have some repeat schools who said, we loved your programming last year. We'd love to have it again this year. And we have some new schools who are reaching out. So we are already getting started. The big item is the Civics Academy. So we have 4th, 5th, and 6th grade teachers who are reaching out and asking to have a attorney and judge come to their class and present a civics lesson.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Ken Lesser, Mayor of Weathersfield. First, the board chair and I Weathersfield got to go see Sally at the Old State House. And if you haven't done that, it's an amazing place, an amazing tour. And we talked about the Kid Governor program, which we have in Weathersfield, and we borrowed heavily in Weathersfield from that program to launch our own Kid Mayor and Kid School Board Chair program to teach kids about democracy, especially local government. And we're rolling out that program again. And we would be very interested in Red, White, and Blue School program as well. So we have some good things going on in Weathersfield right now. Thank you.
Ted?
I have a meeting coming up with our New Milford High School, which is the high school to which our students in Sherman go. And, but I haven't had the meeting yet. At any rate, I've told them about the task force and asked for what they specifically might have me ask about what their interests are. In the meantime, I have mentioned to you my interest, I think I brought it up at the last meeting, in making more use of current affairs lessons within the existing curriculum, if you will, in our schools in Connecticut. And I think I gave you a memo on that, and I would like to have an opportunity to get that on the agenda in one of the upcoming meetings.
Kevin, how about you?
Well, I suppose I could speak to the 5 sections of civics that I'm currently teaching at Craig Computer Science and Engineering High School in Enfield. But the school year got off to a great start, so excited to continue to roll with that and get young people involved in the process of being civically engaged.
And for the record, for those of you that know the inquiry arc, the last stage of the inquiry arc is taking informed action. And Kevin is certainly doing that by, am I right? Running for an office.
Yes, so it's nice for students to be able to see that up close as well. It helps in teaching that they kind of see the entire process, and also involving students in their government and having them participate hands-on, which in my personal opinion is the best way to teach civics, not just out of a book, but to let them see it up close and personal. So we'll get there by the end of the semester. It's early yet, but that's definitely what we work towards. So is there anybody online that has anything going on in their world of civics that they'd like to share with the task force?
Hi, it's Amy Lynn Meyerson, one of the co-chairs of the Hate Crimes Advisory Council. We have one of our regular meetings tomorrow. We'll be discussing further information about adding into the curriculum civics education, along with other information to prevent and fight hate crimes here in Connecticut. But I'd like to turn the floor back over to Jonathan Weiner, if I can. Last week, we had a conference with the ABA and the Connecticut Bar Association on the rule of law and also protecting American democracy. And we talked about these topics. Jonathan?
Yeah, so last week, in this very building, the Connecticut Bar Association hosted its semi-annual Rule of Law conference. That was part of the American Bar Association's Rule of Law listening tour. We had a full room. It was actually, and we were headlined by former Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson, and we had numerous speakers, both national and state, and really one consistent theme throughout was the need for civics education and media literacy. As part of the American Bar Association's listening tour, they're visiting states around the country, trying to see what states are doing in terms of putting civics education resources together. And they did find the work of this group particularly intriguing in terms of state legislative response as a way to marshal resources and publicize all those resources that are out there. So they were very interested in the concept of state legislative task forces.
Looks like we have Tony Perugini online.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So Tony Perugini from CABE, Secretary Treasurer. Just recently, last night, we had a directors meeting where the Education Commissioner, her team, and some folks from the State Department of Education came to chat with us about talking about the upcoming legislation session. And, as always, the department's always encouraging ideas from member districts. But we're talking about, what could possibly be ideas. Obviously, civics, media literacy is always in the list. So we did talk a little about the work this committee is doing, and everyone's definitely looking forward to the report when it's due. We're also, and I will have some questions from various CABE members, directors by the next meeting, although they've been watching this and last discussion. So I'm sure I'll have some questions that we'll probably answer anyway, but they're very interested. A number of reasons is whatever report comes out of this committee and what ultimately gets the Department of Education, CABE will certainly be helping all its member districts with either policy development around civics and media literacy and or helping with curriculum development around that. I am a board member in Cheshire. Within Cheshire, our enrollment's been growing pretty significantly the last few years. It's a great sign. Interesting statistic, we have an increasing number of student enrollments where English is, they speak other than English at home. And that number has grown from 2 to 3% a few years in Cheshire now to about 14%. So we have a growing body, which is awesome. And it just reminded me and Kate board that we have to account for that population, right? As we, again, I'm talking in the weeds as far as where this ends up, and we really dig into the curriculum and rolling that out to make sure that that population is also addressed, that they participate. So a lot of people are anxious and willing to see what comes out of the committee. That's
Thank
it.
you, Tony. Is there anybody else, either in person or online, that has any civic information that they would like to share before we move on?
Yes, Eddie Brown here, Managing Director at Hartford Communities That Care. I would like to share our second year. Since 2017, we resurrected our Youth Leadership Academy. So for the last 8 years, we've been doing a lot of public policy recommendations, presenting them to lawmakers with middle and high school youth throughout the greater Hartford community. For the last 2 years, we have got an amazing partnership with the Office of the Secretary of State, which is the reason why I've been appointed to this board. And so we now have a Civics You Can Use series in our Leadership Academy that is year round. We'll be kicking off cohort 2024-25 come September 28th. We have Stephanie Thomas coming in December 7th, coming in to talk to the youth about, civics they can use in different ways that policies work, as well as, civics education, so they can stand and advocate for themselves. In the past, she has sent some of her colleagues, chief legal aides, as well as deputy secretary and some other colleagues from her office to allow our youth to be engaged in that, not just, regular education, violence, poverty, trauma concerns in our community, but around civics and how the process is, where we have to allow the youth to understand that things don't happen overnight. It's a process to it, and very well implementing that, not just in the community, but within the schools as well.
Thank you for that. And as a teacher of high school students, the concept that change happens slowly is sometimes difficult for them to understand, and sometimes it disengages them from the process. But if we can get them to understand that it's worth doing the work to see that change happen over time, it's a worthwhile thing. Is there any other last comments from in the room or online?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Allison Villanueva from Watertown Public Schools, and I represent the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents as their representative. We have had a wonderful and tremendous start to the school year, and I think all of our superintendents are happy that buses are rolling and things are moving along here. I know that many of my colleagues and a number of schools during convocation and during professional development in those first opening days dived into media literacy in terms of artificial intelligence and how that is going to, it is already impacting the student experience in classrooms. And so that extra step in just looking at all the different modalities in which students and educators engage with media literacy is something that's on everyone's forefront of mind. In addition to that as well, we are in an election year, and so for schools, it's a wonderful opportunity to have our students engage in just critical thinking of how to take opinions, to draw conclusions, to take positions, to hear debates, to really take that civic-minded, engaged way of dealing with what's out there in the community from all levels, pre-K right up to 12. So I know that all of our CAPS members are off and running, and it's exciting to see where this task force is going to be landing soon.
Great, thank you. And so it looks like before we move on to our next agenda item, I wanted to take a minute to introduce our newest member of the task force. When the task force started, there was actually some turnover happening at the Commission of Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity, and they have a seat on the task force, and so no one was appointed at the beginning. However, we now are joined by Melvet Hill, who is the new executive director there. So Melvet, I see you're online. If you'd have any comments you'd like to make, feel free to do so now.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to finally be in the room or the Zoom room here joining you. For those of you who might know, the commission for a number of years, the various commissions, as we're now consolidated down to one, has been the home of our statewide family civics initiative called the Parent Leadership Training Institute. as well as a Children's Leadership Training Institute, where families learn personal leadership as well as how local and state government works. So we're excited to be a part of this task force, and good to be here. Thank you.
But thank you very much for being here online today, and thank you for joining the task force, and look forward to working with you as well. So if there are no other remarks on civic activity where you are, we'll go ahead and move on to the next agenda item, which is a presentation by Irene Parisi, who's the Chief Academic Officer at the Connecticut State Department of Education, to talk to us about the often forgotten piece of this, which is media literacy. So we want to make sure that we are covering all our bases in this task force, and media literacy is an important piece of civic engagement. So Irene, welcome.
Before Irene starts, I got to do this. Sorry. That the Chief Academic Officer, among many tasks, is all of the academic endeavors of the State Department of Education are under her control, may not be the right word, but purview. I don't know what purview means, but Irene is the chief of all academics. And it's funny, it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago when I went to Irene and said, you know, the task force, do you know a consultant that could come and speak to them? They want to have a session on media literacy. And Irene was saying, well, you know, that she could very graciously do that. So, you know, just as Kevin said, the job of the task force is civic education, but media literacy is specifically written into this. And I know there was talking to a couple of task force members. They weren't sure much about media literacy, what it means, what's the strategies. So that's why Irene is the perfect person to come and speak today.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Representative Brown, for inviting me to the task force. I really appreciated the go around because there's so much happening, and all of that, it's all of the above that we're doing for media literacy and to be civically minded and civically engaged. And I truly appreciated Superintendent Villanueva's comments, because that's what it comes down to, are these cross-cutting power skills, I like to call them, that need to happen across all content areas, such as listening and offering opinions, which does start in pre-K and K. They do have a favorite color. They do have a favorite flavor of ice cream, and then they will explain why it is their favorite color and favorite ice cream, debating and engaging. So it really is about developing those skills, that knowledge and those dispositions in any classroom, any moment throughout the entire day. So I think what might be helpful is maybe, what is a question that you have that I might be able to answer on behalf of the department? Anyone can start the conversation.
Hi. This was a topic that came up at the Rule of Law conference last week, and there was a lot of, a lot of discussion about media literacy, and what was sort of left unsaid was media through a partisan filter. And, I think the fact that a lot of media outlets have different, sort of different angles. And I guess, how do you teach principles of media literacy in a nonpartisan way, with, in terms of, in terms of asking students to assess, say, the bias or the angle of the media outlet without, I guess, without engaging in partisanship yourself?
Great question, and a tremendous challenge, certainly in the classroom, both sides, for the teacher and for the learners, and certainly the leadership of the building and of the district. I think what might be helpful to start to answer that question, what I've shared with you, and we can certainly share with those online, is guidance that the State Department of Education had previously released in January of 2020. And this was approved by our State Board of Education. It is indeed called digital citizenship, internet safety, and media literacy guidelines and recommended actions. And I think this is a great starting point because it does sound like you're in that information gathering phase of this work. And this is an important piece of that information. And having reviewed it, resurrecting it, and because we're developing model curriculum out of the last legislative session for digital citizenship, but it's not just digital citizenship, it's all of these things. So I think it's important if you look within this particular document, there's actually a checklist in the back for districts to use. And I think this is a great starting point that to assist in that development of any kind of curriculum or supports or the effective use of technologies, take a moment to assess where you are. So this is for the district or even the classroom, and looking at your policies and procedures, the time for all of your educators, which includes, I think we heard library media and media specialists. I think there's a media director with us joining us, your families too, to kind of weigh in and take stock and have every perspective and interest at the table to understand and share, to develop then the forward policies or practices that whether it is Weathersfield or Watertown or any district to develop for the learner that is sitting in front of them in that chair. But this might begin to answer that. It is not it's not going to be a program. I think it's going to be a combination of different things that you'll need to use comprehensively, and certainly resources that have been highly vetted and reviewed. So model curricula may be a need. And in the work that we've been doing at the State Department in developing K-8 model curricula, we're very proud that we have now released model curricula for social studies with our new standards that were approved by the state board, which does in fact address media literacy and then some, for sure. Mathematics, computer science. And we know computer science is part of this work too in this world with media literacy, English language arts, science, aligned to NGSS, which also in that 3D framework asks students to notice and wonder, but also critically critique and develop a critical stance or even an opinion and take informed action as well. And I might be missing one of the model curricula that we have created, but also the African American, Black and Puerto Rican, Latino studies, which again also ask learners to take in information, determine bias and credibility, take a critical stance, and synthesize that information to be able to communicate a cogent message. So everything that we're saying, it cuts across everything. That's why I started with the guidance, because if we can start there, take stock, assess where we are, and then put in, identify the strategies and next steps going forward. So I know that I will be reviewing this 2020 document through this renewed lens to see what else can we do as a department going forward with Commissioner Russell Tucker and the team.
I guess that's just as a follow-up to that.
Sure.
Are you going to be looking at standards that consider the dissemination of news via social media as well? Because I know there's definitely a bubble effect. If people who look at social media feeds tend to get things that are curated to them and their interests. And so I was wondering if the curriculum is going to address that as well.
Yes, I think we'll have to take a look at that notion of confirming their own bias, right? And finding information out there that confirms or their theory or their thought. So how do you gather all information to then discern fact, discern, again, if there is embedded bias and credibility, even the timeline of it, like when was it actually created, even looking at the images too to determine if they've been doctored or manipulated in some way to then take an informed decision or to be able to participate in a debate around that. So yes, that would be a part of that work going forward. I think what I also wanted to point out in front of you, and again, we can share this afterwards with those that are in the hybrid space, already that we have, so I addressed the guidance that we've prepared, but in our state board approved standards, beginning with the Connecticut core standards, I'm providing you with a trajectory. It's just a small slice, but these are writing standards as well as the speaking and listening standards. And what this does is beginning with kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade is a progression or a trajectory of learning. And there's a couple of things here to notice that this is the idea of technology. But you can see that as you increase by grade, you increase in complexity of use and the skill and the analysis and then the dispositions you have to develop so that they can ultimately, again, gather information, synthesize that information, analyze it, and then communicate or publish a message. So if you start at the bottom of the page with kinder and go all the way up to 11th and 12th grade on the writing learning trajectory, or even the speak and listening, you will see that it's already in our standards. And this is why our model curriculum is so important, because it's designed by these standards. So already we've provided this resource for districts to use. We are doing more with communication and professional learning, of course, but I think this task force is super helpful in that it's not just in your social studies standards or in the social studies classroom or humanities class, it's everywhere. So what we pay attention to is the interdisciplinary mapping, as we call. So you might be in a social studies unit, but it's not just the social studies standards. We also align to the English language arts, the writing, the speaking and listening, even the social emotional learning too, because collaboration in a productive way is also part of this work and that type of classroom. So I think if we continue to develop those dispositions in a classroom where they can engage in the debate and help them analyze and self-reflect and self-regulate, then we may be able to put them in those other spaces where they have to be a part of civic engagement, either in the classroom, in the school, at home, in their community, and then the community at large. So I hope that helps show you that. So where is it in the curriculum? It's already there. We just have to do more to elevate it and lift it up in our lessons and our instruction. And that takes time, that takes support too.
And a specific question that was asked by a task force member who's not here, you're sort of answering. The question was, well, whose job is it to teach this? The answer is actually social studies, language arts, everybody.
It's everyone. Yes, indeed. So we cannot no longer be defined by our content, even though that may be our role, but we have to have an understanding of all of these standards. So that's on the part of the curriculum designers and developers and leaders, the State Department of Education, to provide those resources so that there is a deep understanding of where these standards live. So again, yes, you are responsible for your social studies content, but do not fail to consider where are these particular standards, the media literacy standards, or maybe some art critical analysis of determining whether that photograph or that image that was produced really does not come forward, understanding that embedded bias that might be there. So it's everyone, Steve, yeah.
Irene, so you mentioned that as a State Department, that we're developing these, we've got these trajectories, you've got this checklist and the documents you've given. What kind of feedback have you heard from districts in the state as far as where they stand? I mean, is there a model for them to follow that SDE can provide? Exemplar districts that are doing this well? In other words, is there something that a district who might be struggling with implementing this, they can go to you for supports, and we have districts that are doing it well that we can point them to?
So again, I think this January 2020 document and revisiting that, I think requires another, let's add to it. We want to layer in more supports. I want to visit Superintendent Villanueva and see the work that she's doing. I'm sure there's a lot that is happening across all of our districts. So to say that I have a list of who to go visit right now, I don't have that list. We have bright spots or highlights to showcase for sure, but I think there's more learning to be done. Like I said, out of the last legislative session, the State Department of Education is required, and we're happily doing it, in developing a digital citizenship model curricula for K-12. So I think that work is going to invite people in to share, here's what we're doing and how can we help. It's already started. So I'd like to come back to you later on with some of those, but I invite those districts to share because it's not that we want you to throw the baby out with the bathwater, you know, bring that forward and now you're ready for this next step.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions for Irene from members?
See, whenever I talk about curriculum, you know, I just quiet a room.
Hi, I just had a quick question about um the ages on here. So I remember many years ago first learning about like primary documents
Mhm.
in like late elementary, middle school. And by that point, you've got a kid who potentially for 10, 12 years has been under the impression, well, I saw it on TV, it must be true. Is there anything in here to address that at a younger age?
Absolutely. And actually, I'm going to throw it over to my colleague, Steve Armstrong, who was leading the work with the model curriculum, if you don't mind, Steve, because with the redevelopment of the social studies standards for K-12, we took a hard look at primary source documents and then teaching through and developing that inquiry arc. And also aligning with the C3 framework, of course, which requires that evaluation of primary source documents. So Steve, I don't know if you want to share, because there was a significant team that we convened, because the curriculum was developed by teachers for teachers. So again, I just would invite Steve to share with you some of the highlights.
Yeah, I mean, in the inquiry arc, the third dimension, and I won't go any farther with the inquiry arc, but it's all about a key part of the inquiry process was a learning process where the students do a lot of the work themselves. But in the third dimension of that, tons of that work is the evaluation of primary sources, the validity of primary sources. How do you pick the right sources? And you know, that quite frankly, Allison, is more challenging now because, you know, there's who's to say what the quote unquote right sources are. You know, I'll be honest with you that there's sources that 10 or 15 years ago, I would say, oh, here's a reliable source. Go to this, go to that. Where today, some of those sources would be considered hideously, you know, prejudiced one way or the other. But I just want to tell you, and I'll share with the group that some of the things that are in the inquiry arc and some of the stuff we put out to support the inquiry arc will answer your question. But it's a harder one. I mean, you know what it used to be? It used to be teachers would try to find like, where is the totally unbiased source? Where are but I think there's some transformation to all sources have some bias. So let's recognize and try to identify what the bias of the source is. That probably that magic unbiased source may not exist.
Steve, excuse me, and Irene, as a follow-up to that, you know, we're in the midst of a presidential election, and it's really important we're people, but let's talk about students, but people get their news, hopefully in an unbiased manner. Is there stuff that the State Department of Education puts out that for current events, and particularly elections like this, good sources for students? I'm thinking predominantly high school students, but younger as well, to get this kind of unbiased, or where to go in the media to find information about different candidates at all levels, but it's heightened obviously during the presidential election.
Certainly. So a practice that we have at the State Department is curating some vetted resources that teachers and administrators could use in the classroom to enhance their lessons or supplement their lessons. We call it a PD playlist, if you will. So we're actively curating one of those now, essentially Yes, teaching in an election year. These would be resources, though, that have been vetted by other resources, by even vetted by the U.S. Department of Education, so that they're more broad about teaching democracy, or these skills that I had shared before about being a critical thinker, being a communicator, engaging in the debate, critiquing the reasoning of others, right? And so those are the dispositions that we want to develop, and through these resources, we think that are universal enough, not editorializing, not so much on one side or the other, but just it's a good lesson to say, here is an image. Let's evaluate it. What do you see? What do you notice? Synthesize that information and then share. And this is how we talk with each other. This is how we engage in collaboration. So the short answer is yes. And we also, just to add to it, with Steve leading it, we conducted a request for information. So it's an RFI. It's a way to out there to put criteria out to vendors or publishers based on our criteria for resources to support our model curricula. And we just finished that review. And so we'll be certainly working with the commissioner to share those resources very soon, because we do think that is important, that we can provide resources that educators can use with confidence. That's why our model curriculum is so important, because it's wide open. It's on Go Open CT. So it's a digital platform. We've digitized it for ease of access, but we have resource libraries embedded in every content area and in every unit. Again, resources that we have reviewed and vetted, approved, so that teachers can use that with confidence, but also in a moment's notice if needed, so that they do not have to search elsewhere. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, very good. Thank
And
you.
can I just say, Ken, and I think it's almost immediately going to be released. We created, as Irene said, a teaching democracy playlist that is heavily vetted. I mean, we had webinar series that we listened to every one of them to make sure, and those are going to be released fairly.
We'll need to go back and meet with our leadership team to review.
Yeah,
and
but
certainly
fairly soon.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Fairly soon.
Because we're committed, again, to ensuring that our teacher colleagues have those resources to teach through.
In answer to your question, Ken, I use a source called All Sides. You may be familiar with them, and they do a pretty good job of rating all the major and minor national sources of information, from the New York Times, the New York Post, Washington Post, and newsletters. Practically everything else. They have 5 ratings: left, lean left, center, lean right, right. And if you want yourself or your students or anybody to get a broad range of information on the issues, you can pick a couple of rights and a couple of lefts. As I've said in my writings, every hour you spend watching MSNBC, you spend at least half an hour watching Fox, or vice versa. But All Sides is a pretty good source, I think.
And I think
Thank you.
a good strategy is, Ted, I think, just maybe with the class start that, but I really think the ultimate goal is develop the kids in school, develop those skills in a class, so ultimately you wouldn't need that. That kids in your class could have the skills to be able to identify those sources. But I'm not denying the value of the source.
that would be ideal for
Yeah,
sure.
I'm not denying the value of the source.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Angela, you are in a school, correct?
Just frantically drove there from one now. Yeah.
Good. If you don't mind, what issues or how is the large topic of media literacy? Who teaches it in your place?
Well, the first thing I thought was, over and above all of this, how do you stop them from just using AI to just everything and not even question it? So that's a whole nother little bomblet that I can drop into the discussion. Maybe you discussed it before I got here. Sorry. But yeah, I mean, we try to We try to infuse it throughout for sure. But they want to use Wikipedia. They want to just Google things, or ask AI or ask Siri. I had an interesting moment last year with my freshmen where I asked them a question and I was like, somebody look it up. This is before I figured out that you have to take away their phones. So they picked up their phone and they didn't even bother to Google it. They just said, "Hey Siri." And then Siri said the answer and it wasn't right. And the kid argued with me because how could I know more than Siri? And I was like, oh my gosh. So I have more questions or issues than, oh my God, there's Siri. It's a challenge. I have more problems than answers right now. And then you add AI to it. So it's a challenge that needs to be addressed every single year coming all the way up, because by the time they get to high school, if you're trying to start it there, you're too late. So resources are good. PD and training is good, because some of the things you were just talking about as a social studies teacher in year 25, did not know those were there and have never been shown them. Not that someone has to show me for me to see it, but like, there's just never enough time. We need more training. We need to, all these things that you all have put together with so much time and effort, I didn't even know about them. So
the good news is more professional learning and supports are coming. But I think you bring up a good point. As learners are outsourcing their thinking to these other tools, like you said, Siri and AI, it's all the more important for them to develop that skill to be able to analyze what came back to them. What did that generative AI provide for them, or what Siri gave them, or Google in their search, to be able to analyze it and discern what is providing me with the most credible answer, the most timely answer. And when we say time, when was it written? If it was written in 1998, well, I may not trust that resource as much as I'm looking for something more current. So it's not just timely in this moment, but it's also the time and an event and decade that it might have been written. So I just wanted to repeat that as learners are outsourcing their thinking, there's a reason why they're doing that. So then how do we equip them with those same skills that we've talked about to ensure that they can then have, like, again, that cogent communication with their peers or even with their teachers?
I appreciate the conversation, and especially the idea of the introduction of AI and how this impacts the work that we're doing in the classroom, particularly in the area of civics and social studies. I personally view this as perhaps the new civic purpose of public education. As you said, Irene, that it's being able to analyze and deduce fact from what is produced by computers. Whereas in previous generations, we had to memorize information. That no longer is necessary. The information is available at your fingertips. It's what can you do with it? So it's the analysis of said information, and it's not going away. So as a society, we need to understand how to utilize it and how to discern credible information. So I personally view this as I said, one of the new public purposes of education is so that we have a society who can discern fact from these sources that they're going to have around them all the time. So I appreciate the work that SDE's been doing in this area. And as a classroom teacher myself, as Angie said, I would love to have more of that professional development to understand how to use those things and how to better instruct students to use it as well.
I think the challenge perhaps that we have as a society is no one in this room, but I've read that some political leaders use AI to write their speeches. That I've read about lawyers that are using AI to write their legal briefs. If adults are using it in this, I think, how do we what's the line that, well, adults can use it this way, but kids, we're trying to restrict kids. I think that's a difficult task.
I think we should do more to take advantage of the link between the students whose education we're working to improve and their parents. So we don't have to wait for another generation before we have a well-informed electorate. And I think it's pretty obvious when you read about interviews with the man on the street and focus groups and whatnot on the issues that are now being addressed in connection with the election, how ill-informed, not necessarily ill-informed, but not informed, many of the voters are. And I see, as I've mentioned, I see the link between the civics education in the school, especially if we can include a good focus on current affairs instead of historical affairs. And if we had something that I think I may have mentioned in the meetings before, something akin to what I grew up with, weekly readers, that was something that the youngsters took home from school, discussed with their parents, their siblings, their friends' parents. And it would be very helpful in getting the parents on board, getting the parents informed. And right now, the only captive audience we have to teach what we're all interested in teaching are the students. But this is a way to get the students' parents as a captive audience. If we could have the current affairs aspects of our civics education go home to the parents and be discussed with the parents, that would be a huge link. It would get the parents interested, get an exchange going, and I think it would just help the generations that are out of school become better informed.
Sure, agreed. I know.
And that handout could be, in the old days, it was a piece of paper that I brought home. It said weekly read or something like that.
I
Now,
remember
of
the
course, it
weekly
would be a
readers
CD
and
or a
Dice
flash
magazine.
drive or Lord knows what.
Absolutely. So you may or may not know, the State Department of Education and Commissioner Russell Tucker is committed to developing literacy of all of our learners across the state. And we have
Excuse me, say again.
that the State Department of Education and the Commissioner is committed to developing literacy and developing our readers across the state. We have now a Center for Literacy Research and Reading Success in the State Department of Education. And we're focusing on the science of reading and the neuroscience of reading, brain structured, evidence-based reading, if you will. And so these are new practices that have been happening and we've been implementing with our districts. And so we are committed to that. So the family engagement component of that is critical. And that's part of the professional learning we're providing to districts and supports and resources. And so agreed. How do you build that bridge from school to home? As well as I know the commissioner is committed to her family engagement and just having all stakeholders having a seat at the table, including students, to understand how is this impacting them, and that informs our work. So even in everything that we've done with model curricula, and even now as we go forward, we always stop to ask ourselves, how are we engaging all stakeholders so that whatever we do produce is relevant to all. So I just wanted to share with you that
Good.
that is
Yeah,
part of
excellent.
our practice, it's part of the commitment. And I know that you will see more coming out of our Center for Literacy Research and Reading Success, again, building that bridge from school to home.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Sounds good.
Irene, is there specific guidance that the states, as a state person that works there, just asking that question, is there guidance on AI that the state is working on or has produced?
So there was recently, again, out of the latest session, there is work to be done related to artificial intelligence. So we are working through that. There's a number of things that we will produce, certainly guidance, working with the commissioner on that and working with the Commission of Educational Technology as well. And so there's more to come on that front, as well as a pilot for schools to engage in on utilizing the tools so that we can learn from and curate best practices too with that. So more to come.
Well, seeing no other questions, Irene, thank you very much
Thank you.
for participating today, and very insightful, and look forward to continuing the work with you and the work that you're doing at the Department of Ed to help provide these best practices for our schools and our teachers. So thank you very much for being here today.
You're very welcome, and
Does
thank
anyone-
you. And thank you for all that you're doing.
Okay. So that brings us to the next agenda item. Which is to review our task force goals and plan for the final report. It's already the middle of September. We've been at this now since April, I believe, and we are due to report to the state in January of 2025. So at this point in the task force's work, we just want to start to narrow our scope down here towards this report that we will be making. And as part of that, just to refresh our memories of what the task of the task force is, I have the legislation up in front of me, Public Act 23-150, Section 6, which reads as the established Connecticut Civics Education, Civics Engagement, Media Literacy Task Force to study and develop strategies to improve and promote civic engagement and instruction on civics, citizenship, media literacy, and American government. Such studies shall include, but need not be limited to: 1, reviewing existing state and national curricula and standards, classroom practices, and high school and college graduation requirements to identify and publicize best practices in instruction on civics, citizenship, media literacy, and American government. 2, receiving recommendations from educators, administrators, governmental entities, non-governmental organizations, and the public. 3, a review of existing civics, citizenship, media literacy, and American government educational opportunities provided by governmental entities and non-governmental organizations throughout the state. And 4, exploring the feasibility of establishing public and private partnerships to fund, coordinate, promote, and support enhancements to such engagement and instruction. I feel that we have touched upon most of these things throughout the course of our work on the task force. And so going forward, we will begin to compile what we've discussed and begin to put together that report that we owe to the state in January. Steve, I don't know if you have any.
No, and I believe Rosie, when would you think this actually would be due?
It should say so in the statute. It's probably January 1st.
So it's due January 1st.
Yes, it is due January 1st, 2025. So that gives us a little bit of time now to compile the information. We've had a number of presentations, very valuable with the information that is being done. And I think that one of the goals that I had in this task force was to identify the areas of strength. It was quite clear, I feel, to most of us that there is a weakness, generally speaking, in civic knowledge and civic education in the state and in the nation, but that there are pockets of things that are being done very well, which for many of you, those are the organizations and the things that you represent. And so being able to capture those and include that in the report, that there are things being done and that it would behoove the state to look for ways to incorporate those more into our school curriculums, to work with SDE, to partner with them to bring that in. And so that would be the goal here. And then certainly the discussion that's taken place around the idea of a civic seal, which is a very tangible way that could be achieved in the relatively near future to get our students, at least at the high school level, more engaged in the civic process and have something tangible at the end that they could show for their ability and their civic knowledge and their ability to participate in their communities. I feel that is a start. And of course, we want to make sure that we're incorporating it more all the way K through 12 and beyond, so that our adults in our state community are civically prepared. So that will now become the next task for the task force to compile this. Steve and I will get to work on kind of putting together the ideas, and certainly we will also include input from the rest of the members of the task force. Prior to finalizing the report, we will send it out and make sure you have a chance to review it as well, and add, have any inputs that you might see necessary for the report before it is finalized and provided for the state.
Could we, would we have the opportunity, let's say now or after this meeting and before the next meeting, to write up a document, a brief document clearly specifying what any specific item that we would like to end up in some form in that report? I would like to, for example, be able to send my idea to you two and ask you to send it out to the task force, so they'll have a chance to read it before I discuss it at the next meeting. Is that possible?
Yes, absolutely. We will seek the input, perhaps start a document that can be shared with folks, so that you can provide your questions,
Yeah.
or particular pieces of information you'd like to see included. Which is why it's good that we are at this point in September, because we now have the time to do that and to be able to work
Right.
back and forth to get it correct before we submit.
Right. But before I give a written, a verbal report on it, I would like to put something in writing and get it in the hands of everybody so they can read it, agree with it, disagree with it, think it's crazy, think it's a good idea or whatnot, but at least be prepared to ask me questions at the next meeting.
That works for me, Ted. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Speaking of that,
Go ahead, Angie.
did you get the civic action portfolio? I sent that, did it get to you?
It did.
Okay.
I did
I
receive
know
that
it's not very long ago.
yesterday evening, I believe, or yesterday afternoon. I did have a chance, and I mentioned to Steve earlier that I did receive that. And on first glance, it looks fantastic. I'm looking forward to reading through it a little bit more. If you'd like to speak to that a little bit, if you have that in front of you, you're more than welcome to do that, so that the other folks on the task force know what you're referring to.
Okay. I think you asked me to present on it or something, but we didn't say when. So I scrounged around and was like, oh my God, is it today? So this is, I don't teach civics at my high school. I teach almost everything else, but the civics teachers do have for the kids a civic action portfolio that they have to complete in order to get their credit, in addition to other things. But there are several categories of, communicating positions, interviewing elected officials, respecting diverse points of view by hosting a community forum or debate, communicating with public officials in various ways. There are different categories, and they have to, attend town meetings and participating in elections and various other things. So it's really just, if you ignore the first page, which is not a big deal, but really it's just one page. It's a page and a half. It's pretty quick to see. This is the actual assignment that he gives the kids. So perhaps that can be circulated to everyone and we can chat about it next meeting. I tried to get the teacher who actually does this to Zoom in with us, but he's shy. So I'll have more time to work on him between now and then, but if not, I can present it well enough.
Is that an across the board requirement, or is that for the special civics diploma?
Well, civics is a requirement, semester requirement for all of our seniors. And so
Right.
and it's a graduation requirement. At our school, we have this. I don't know if other schools have it.
Thanks.
So it's not just classroom learning and writing essays. They actually have to do stuff, which is cool.
That's cool.
Yeah. And kids interview me as the interview an expert or interview an elected official thing. I get a few of those every year, but there's some cool stuff here. Testifying on lobbying, cool stuff. I don't know how many kids do those things. It depends on the teacher and how equipped he is to connect them. But I always make sure the kids know, if you want to do some of these swankier ones, hit me up. But it depends on the expertise of the faculty and the motivation of the kid. But I think now that I've really looked at it carefully, it's pretty cool. And hopefully other schools might want to adopt it. We should definitely consider it.
I would absolutely agree. It is similar to something that I do within my own classes. It's not a school requirement, but as the core civics teacher in my school, I've utilized similar for a number of years. And Jonathan, to your point, while it's not a state requirement yet to perform a portfolio like that. To me, it's what I envision as what a student would need to do to earn a civic seal. So it's kind of a prototype of what we would be asking potentially our students across the state in order to earn that civic seal to graduate in the state of Connecticut. All right. Any other thoughts?
Yeah,
comments?
On the seal, and I think it's a great idea. In our, however we address it in the final report, this should be, and I'm not sure about exactly what it would be. Why, or what we think will come out of it. What are we gaining by having this seal available? Obviously, it's nice for the youngster that gets it and whatnot. They can build up their resume and so on and so forth. And it will certainly, it'll encourage some youngsters that might not be that interested in paying attention to civics. It might encourage them to get involved if they're somewhat competitive and whatnot. But I think we ought to be very specific. You know, not just it's a nice idea. Obviously, it's a great idea, but be specific about what we really hope to achieve by it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think the process would go something like this. We propose in our report the idea, the concept of the civic seal. It then would have to be turned into legislation to require it or to allow it. And then the State Department of Education would come up with the specifics on what the requirement would look like and what would have to be done in order to earn that. So
yeah, but we'd have to start why we want it to be addressed.
Absolutely.
And go the next step. Yeah. Yeah.
I think in terms of the why, you know, with what we're seeing with the students who participate in the Bar Association and the judicial branch programs is you're increasing the number of informed citizens you have out there, essentially to serve as ambassadors for these things. So it's just you increase the number of voices. So I think that's the simplest expression of why.
Sure.
Involvement in some of the programs that you call sponsored, right? That would allow you to answer. You're involved or out. That's a window.
I think we're gonna have to increase our staffing.
Or the hours in the day. I'm not sure. One of the two. I'm not sure which will happen first, but all right. Any other comments or thoughts on today's presentation or the work that's been done to this point?
I was just thinking it would be interesting if we could figure out a way to track, like the why is engagement or whatever the lofty future goal we have. And that sounds good, but how do you track it? How do you prove it? Right. So I was thinking, okay, I guess at the state level, there would be some record of everyone who graduates with a civic seal. And then first I thought, oh, so you keep communicating. They all have to give their email so you can reach out to them every 5 years or something. But at the very least, when people they go out there into the world and they get elected, it would be interesting to track how many elected officials got the civic seal or something, like thinking of some way that wouldn't be too much work to track these people. I think that would be fascinating.
Certainly with AI, we ought to be able to do it.
If they can write an essay
I
with
wonder-
AI, then surely we can do this.
I wonder if the Boy Scouts, if Eagle Scouts who, you know, accomplished a lot of, or become Eagle Scouts, if they're tracked by the Boy Scouts of America or something like that, as they go forward to see what's.
Yeah, any organization that has done something like that, maybe we could see how they do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Or the State Department of Education or whoever's going to be tracking this. Just a thought.
Duly noted. Comments, questions?
What's that?
Comments or questions?
Just the depressing. There was an article, there's a publication that comes out every week. national survey that they did, that national survey of social studies / civics, that some 57% of them will not teach the election this year.
Fear of parental involvement. I saw that article. Yeah.
Uncertainty of being able to have a class. Not able to have a classroom discussion without disruption, worry about parental involvement. I don't know about it. That to me is just a depressing thing that I don't know that we have any control over, but.
I feel like I should say something about that, but I'm not sure exactly what to say. You have to have administration that backs the teachers so that if a parent says something, the teacher still feels protected to be able to teach. And we're in a different climate than we were even 5-10 years ago. Especially with the phones, they can be recording you. Like, you don't know what's going on in there. It's crazy. So it's hard. But on an optimistic note, as I was walking by our civics teacher's classroom this morning, he had the kids with a rubric and fact checking stuff, and they were watching the debate and they were discussing it. And it went fabulously as far as I could tell. I'll check in with him again tomorrow, but some teachers are bravely doing this job anyway, despite how hard and harder and harder it gets. So someone has to do it.
Unfortunately.
I commend the teachers for doing, I think all of us, especially with this, or primarily because of this election year, have difficulty at times talking to friends, colleagues, even family members sometimes who are of the opposite opinion as to who they're going to vote for. And it's really gotten to be a problem with some people. I know I have a running battle with somebody who's completely opposed to what I believe and whatnot, and we've maintained our friendship, but it's been an effort, I think. It shouldn't be that way. We should, and I guess it begins with the civics education, understanding the importance of civil discourse and the importance of listening. And I guess that's all part of our civics education. But it's important for all of us.
I think the solution to it, unfortunately, it's kind of that catch-22 situation we're in, because the solution is greater civic knowledge and fact-based evidence, all those things. And you only get that through civic education.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's hard to teach that right now. So we're in kind of a rock or hard place scenario, and somewhere that has to be broken. And my hope is that if we can shine a little bit of light on that, at least in the state of Connecticut, that we can be the start of the change that we want to see.
Kevin, I'd suggest that actually that probably be the introductory paragraph of the report.
Again, duly noted. Thank you, John.
Because if something, God, this is depressing to me, but if something doesn't change, look, 15 school districts or more in 2016 and 2020 were instructed that social studies teachers were instructed not to teach the election. This year, it'll be some similar number, I'm sure. What gets that ever to change? Here's 3 straight elections where, I mean, God, there's no answer to this somewhere, but here's 3 straight elections where teachers were told they can't or won't teach the election. What's going to be different in 2028?
Was that nationwide?
Go ahead.
Was that nationwide? What was the stat?
15?
Percent?
No, 15 districts
In our state.
in our state.
And they're being told this by their administrators?
That they were told by administrators not to teach the election, correct?
So that's disheartening. There's obviously a better way, and the teacher that Angie cited is doing a better way. But I also think that one of the things that
we can talk about, I'm sure current affairs teachers are doing this, is just teaching young people about voting and the history of voting. That just over 100 years ago, women got the right to vote, and just the struggle to get that, the history of people of color getting the right to vote, and the struggle about that. And that when these high school students who may be 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, that as soon as they turn 18, they should register to vote, but they need to learn this. And, you know, that is somewhat I believe, in a kind of nonpartisan way. And I'm sure the best teachers are doing that, but I'm also sure not enough teachers are doing it.
So if I may share, I do think we are at a pivotal time in public education in general. As we talk about the election or talking about voting or things of that nature, before all of this, or perhaps simultaneously with all of this, it's also teaching our young people whose brains are still developing at this point in time, how to regulate themselves, how to engage in human-to-human contact, as simply put. Because no matter what the topic may be, it's how in which we carry ourselves, present ourselves, listen to one another, articulate our needs, to be able to engage in, and somebody said civil discourse, to become these citizens of the world. And so I do think when I say it's a pivotal time in education, it's more than just the content. It's about public education as well as partner organizations and parenting all coming together to learn about just how we interact with one another as humans again. And if we can do that in a respectful, open dialogue way, and perhaps I'm thinking about a unicorn or utopia, then I think no matter what the topic is, we can engage in that civil discourse. I do think our public schools have a huge list of things, and not just a list, but a very complex list of things to provide and to teach and to provide opportunities for our children. So any support that comes from the State Department, any support that comes from partner organizations, will help every stakeholder in a school district. So I would agree with you, Steve. It's disheartening to hear that things can or cannot be taught. But I also understand different perspectives of when the community or the audience may be dysregulated, or even faculty within are dysregulated in a way where the conversation can't happen safely, where sometimes self-preservation and fight or flight kicks into mode. So I do think it's a little bit of both and a little bit of everything that needs to happen in order for civics education to continue moving forward in a positive way.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, some of this is beyond just like how a bill becomes a law or how the Electoral College works. It's as is suggested by several people, isn't it creating civility in American society? That's a pretty tall task, but that's one of the things that rigorous civic education does, I think.
Well, speaking of tall tasks, we certainly we have one in front of us here to make that convincing recommendation of why this matters, and certainly I think we will be able to do that. I think we have something that we really can go for, at least as a start, with Civic Seals, and certainly to go and move that even farther forward. But before I go on even more, I believe I saw a hand online. Melvet, was your hand up?
It was. I was going to save it for later, but I just wanted to say that I agree. I think this is a very productive conversation. I would also add that Sally Whipple and I are working with the Secretary of State's office to look at trying to do another civic health index. And I think it's important in the context of this conversation as we look at the future of our state and also our democracy and democratic process, right? And so I think it might be interesting. We think it's time to do another civic health index, but this might help inform the work as well to really take a temperature throughout the state, not just with students, but everyone who resides here, and see really where we are on that index.
Great, thank you. Sally, did you have anything to add to that?
We can't hear Sally.
Forgot. So the Civic Health Index is a really good way for people to see how broad civics can be and to see where we stand. We can compare ourselves to other states as well, but it encompasses things such as, do you volunteer? Do you donate to an organization? Do you talk to people in your neighborhood? And it goes from that to things that are more focused on government and voting, but it's a really good tool for understanding civics, and each Civic Health Index report comes with a list of recommendations for things that we can all do to raise the level of civics in Connecticut. So I'm hoping we can get another one done.
Sally, you might like to know that that's how I start my class, my civics class every semester when I teach it, is with that civic index. And we have the students I have them do a gallery walk around the room. I have those questions posted around the room. And as you said, some of those are as basic as, do you talk to your neighbors? You know, the idea of getting started, you know, in civics is as simple as being involved in your neighborhood in some way, being connected to the people around you. So that's important. And I'm glad to hear that this is in the works again, because I think you're right. We need, especially in the post-COVID era here, we need to know where we stand and why this matters. It just further proves the importance of the work that we've been doing on this task force and what we need to do as a state.
And, you know, I think too that, you know, this enhanced civility that comes out of civic education, it doesn't, this group is not going to fix Washington tomorrow. But you know what civic educators, a lot of the think tanks say? You start with your own community. You make Weathersfield better. You make whatever town or whatever school you're in better. That is doable, that's where we can start things. And I don't think that's pie in the sky. That is not depressing, because that's an area we can work on.
So I'm thinking, oh,
In addition to civics education.
Mm.
Started.
Mhm.
I want to re-suggest from a while back. I'm just thinking about Sally, who lives in the town where I teach. Super cool. And you do that activity. I did not know about any of this, but I love it. And I'm going to tell my civics teacher. And that brings me back to some kind of PD gathering for civics teachers from all over to share these things. I'm not sure when or where or who's going to pay for it or who's running it, but I'm saying that if we brought a bunch of civics teachers together, really cool things would happen. For like a fun 3 hours or something where they can share ideas. So yeah, please.
This civics teacher agrees. And I think, again, for me, even with the legislation that I introduced that ended up in this task force, the whole purpose was for the intentionality of teaching civics. For far too long, social studies in general and civics specifically have been placed on the back burner of our education system because it's not a tested subject. It's not measured by one of the standardized assessments that the state uses to indicate learning. And unfortunately, as I said on the floor of the House when I spoke to the bill, that the test for this is life, right? Our communities, what we see going on out there in our civic life, that's the test. It's a real life test. And sadly, we're kind of failing. So that should be the indicator right there that this is necessary and that we need to do more of it and be more intentional about it. And so, you know, the discourse we've had on the course of this task force is wonderful because we see that there are good things going on. We need to be intentional about putting it together and doing it intentionally.
I was just going to build on that. You kind of said it, so I'll be brief. I'm so hopeful. And the reason I'm so hopeful is because so many good things are already happening. We just need to share it. I've learned so much being part of this group that I didn't know about. And if we can start to share that throughout the state, and maybe we produce a menu of different opportunities for folks, particularly educators, civics educators, the answers are out there. A lot of the work is being done or already been done. And so I'm so hopeful about that. I think we're on our way.
Could I ask if anybody online or here, if there's specific information or specific things that you think we need to have before we start writing the recommendation? Right? Like, what does a high school civics curriculum look like or something like that? If any, or there's other information that you think we could use as a group, could you email that to Kevin or I? Because then we'll have, do you know, if there's stuff that we should consider before we actually start writing, let us know what that is and we'll make an effort to get it.
So as we wrap up, I'd ask if there are any last comments or thoughts. And if not, again, thank you all for your participation in this process. As Steve said, if you would forward any particulars that you feel should be in this report to us, that way we have that information as we start writing. And then again, there'll be opportunities for more input. We will have some correspondence with you via email to allow for more of that to be entered into the report. And so being that it is September, the report is due January 1st. We have a few months here to write the report and also to edit the report. And so we will try to schedule another meeting possibly in mid-November to check in, discuss, and edit, if you will, the report so that it can be finalized before that January 1 reporting deadline.
You think we could move it up a little bit and between now and January, make it monthly? If it's going to get kind of tight, if we go mid-November, then the next will be mid-January. There, don't you think we should try to get maybe 2 meetings in before?
Perhaps we can try to get one more in. We're trying to work with everybody's schedules, in particular, I've got quite a busy one at the moment. But maybe, Ted, I agree, we might need a second meeting. So perhaps there'll be one before that November. Perhaps we can do one in mid-October and then one at the end of November.
That would be, if you can fit that in with what you're doing.
We'll make it work. I care about civics that much. We'll make it work.
Later than 3, please.
We'll see about a 3:30 start time. All right. Well, without any other information, Steve, any parting words?
No, I mean, I hope, by the way, my depression is always about these political things is always far overcome by my optimism. Right? We can't change Washington, but we can make small steps to change Connecticut. And if we do that, good for us.
Hear, hear. Well, on that note, thank you again. We'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting and appreciate all of your comments and thoughts today. Everybody get home safe.